Hello and welcome to the first episode of Executive Wellness Unplugged. I am your host, Lisa Kelly. Our new and timely podcast series will feature candid conversations with industry leaders and experts about matters relating to the mental and physical health and well-being of executives and managers, the very cornerstone of impactful leadership. Together, we're going to explore how prioritizing leader and employee well-being is not a sign of indulgence, but perhaps a necessity. It's the spark that ignites our best work, fuels our passion, and enables us to lift our teams, our people, and ourselves to new heights. So in this podcast series, you'll hear from experts, trailblazers, and inspiring leaders who have navigated the landscape of executive wellness. And we're going to unpack practical strategies that go way beyond traditional self-care, that delve into holistic practices, and that share compelling stories that resonate with our shared experiences to provide you with actionable insights to enhance your own wellness journey. So while this podcast series will primarily speak to the health and well-being of leaders, each episode will offer valuable, inspirational insights, tactical well-being, and life-enhancing strategies for virtually everyone. So in this inaugural episode, Living and Leading with Just One Heart, a cardiologist's novel approach to well-being, Dr. Jonathon Fisher and I will be exploring benefits and simple yet impactful ways to optimize our mind, our body, and overall health through living a more holistic and mindful life. So in my role as an executive wellness coach, I have really been eagerly awaiting our discussion. So by way of introduction, Dr. Jonathon Fisher is a Harvard and Mount Sinai educated cardiologist dedicated to addressing both the physical and emotional aspects of cardiac care. He's a mindfulness meditation teacher. How cool is that? And an organizational well-being leader for a team of 38,000. And Dr. Fisher is also the co-founder of the Ending Clinician Burnout Global Community, and as mentioned, is the author of the newly released best-selling book, Just One Heart, The Cardiologist's Guide to Healing, Health, and Happiness. So welcome, Dr. Fisher. It's really wonderful to have you help me launch our first podcast. And so to perhaps kick off our discussion, I'm curious to learn what inspired or maybe called you to integrate mindfulness into your patient care as a cardiologist.
Lisa, it's wonderful to be with you. And when I got your book in the mail after ordering it, I was blown away.
Oh, thank
I said,
you.
"You're welcome." I said, "This is someone right after my own heart who I can learn from and share with." And
Well,
I
goes both ways.
goes both ways. If I think back about how I ended up practicing meditation, mindfulness, breath work with my heart patients in the clinic and even sometimes in the hospital, it's a long story, but it's really a short story. It began with me discovering the practices at a late age, so just about 15 years ago, as a result of some personal struggles, both at work and at home, emotional challenges. Someone suggested that I take up meditation, and I had never thought about it. I thought it was for Zen masters in special clothing in a mountaintop somewhere. And instead, I bought an MP3 recording, and I taught myself how to meditate slowly. And then as a scientist, I said, well, I wonder if there's any evidence that this does anything beyond make us feel less stressed. And I started seeing cardiology reports from all around the world. These really trend-setting doctors who were experimenting with meditation for their heart patients. And eventually, in 2017, the American College of Cardiology, who I was certified by, released an official report summarizing decades of research showing that there are benefits for lowering blood pressure, for improving eating habits and weight management, diabetes, smoking cessation, you name it. for protecting our physical hearts, and that got me curious. And I figured, why not start practicing and offering the practice with each and every one of my thousands of heart patients that I see.
Oh, that is so encouraging. So just to put a time frame on this, how long then have you been using or involving mindfulness work in your work?
It was exactly 2012
Okay.
when I approached the hospital leaders, and they were looking for topics of conversation for programs for what's called the hospital grand rounds, which is when all the doctors come together and talk about the latest science. And I said, I have something I want to talk about, but it's a little bit out there.
Little
What
new
do you
agey.
think? New agey. And I gave a talk that was titled Mindfulness and the Heart in 2012. And it was, the reception was mixed. Some were very curious. And my practice with patients, it took me a few more years. I eventually became certified to teach mindfulness and compassion practices. I went to Oxford in the UK, and
Right.
then I came back. So it was about 6 or 7 years ago.
So I'm curious, where would this align with in time period with, say, Jean Kabat-Zinn? Am I saying his name correctly?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because he introduced, the MBRS. I know.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So in
In the
in
in the
19,
hospital settings, I think too, right?
exactly. So I wasn't familiar with him at the very beginning, but as I dove deeper, I learned about this man named Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who was a microbiologist who, like many American scientists in the 1960s, were in Far East Asia learning meditation techniques, and they came back to the US and introduced it into their practice of psychology and in other fields. And John Kabat-Zinn opened a clinic called the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction
Right.
Clinic and started a protocol called MBSR. And he found significant reduction in pain
Yeah.
among patients with cancer and other afflictions. And ever since then, the applications of mindfulness have spread so that you can't go to a company, a Fortune 100 company now that doesn't have some kind of
Yeah.
mindfulness
So
training.
maybe is it fair to say his work might have been a bit of a foundational, launch pad for you and so that you had something to these people who are sort of,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's important for me to point that out when I'm introducing these practices because,
Mhm.
if someone's coming with something that's new and scary, people won't receive it. But I often open up my programs with executives and other people with the evidence, with,
Yeah.
thousands of research papers beginning in the late 1970s and 1980s with his work and others.
Yeah, he did a lot of evidence-based research, right? And
Hmm.
study, published work.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So with respect to mind-heart connection in leadership, we're going to go right there. How can leaders harness the power of the mind-heart connection
Mm-hmm.
to improve their leadership style and really help foster, a positive organizational culture? I know it's a pretty big question, but
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a great question. And I think the first is to focus on this idea of the mind-heart connection, because there are plenty of leaders who are all in and they get it and they really want to empathize and practice compassion and build teamwork. But there are also other leaders who maybe aren't familiar with this idea of the mind-heart connection. Maybe they're struggling to connect with the people that work with them or underneath them. They're not quite sure why. People aren't following their initiatives. And often, if we take a look, it's because they haven't recognized that we have to bring our minds and our hearts into our work. So
right.
with that as a backdrop, the first step is to recognize that unless people, there's a famous quote, unless people know how much you care, they don't really care how much you know.
Oh,
And
I love
so,
that quote. I love that quote.
yeah, and so the emphasis is that leaders are often already know how to balance the spreadsheets, already know basic management principles, time management, but the missing piece is so often deep empathy and compassion, and also a positive mindset and heart set where we all know the leader who is grumpy and gruff and frustrated and not fun to be around, and we kind of shy away from them. Well, that doesn't foster a psychologically safe environment. So the corner of a psychologically safe environment where everyone feels welcome is a leader who exudes heart-based qualities like generosity, kindness, gratitude, joy, empathy, compassion, and I would say even love. And with that as a backdrop, now that we have the playing field, we can start to talk about how we develop the connection. And there are many, many ways to develop the connection. But the first is, as a leader, to simply pick one of those qualities.
Mm.
Perhaps it's generosity.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's generosity. And see if there's a way to first notice, are you practicing generosity in your leadership? Or is it all about give me, taking from other people? And if that's the quality that you want to work on, just spend a week or even a month and decide one or two actions that you can enact each and every day. Maybe it's giving a compliment to someone who wasn't expecting it. Maybe it's calling someone out on the platform, on the business platform, and saying, this person did a wonderful job. There's so many ways to practice these heart-based qualities.
So can I play devil's advocate? So if you were
Yeah.
as a leader and you were coaching me, let's just say maybe you've already encountered this. They say, like, Dr. Fisher, with all due respect, you don't understand. I have ROI. I have shareholders to appease. How can I factor in one more thing like they're proposing here in my busy day? And I get this all the time, coaching executives, right?
I love that. I love that. And it's really the most important question to answer for some people because there's a natural barrier. Fortunately, the answer has been answered definitively and clearly that it's a false choice that these people, these devil's advocates, are asking for. I have to choose the bottom line or these heart-based qualities. I have to, be tough and firm and forceful. Otherwise, people aren't going to follow me. Well, the evidence is very clear. Number one, it's not an either or. In fact, companies with leaders that are compassionate, have their employees feel cared for, are not only happier, but they are absolutely more successful.
Yeah.
And I would just refer them to books like the book called Compassionomics by a fellow physician, the chief medical officer at Cooper University named Steven Cesiak, who decided he wanted to search the research on the economics of kindness in businesses. And he laid out the case with the CEO, Anthony Mazzarelli, for the role that compassion plays when we practice compassion for ourselves and others. So I would argue to the person very gently, I would say, you're giving me a false choice. And if you're missing compassion, you're actually going to be less successful than your competitor down the street.
Yeah, and I can't remember his name, but you may know the story. He's no longer with us, but he was a former CEO of, I think, Southwest Airlines.
Mm-hmm.
He used to write handwritten notes to all his employees.
That's right.
And when he passed, they had a full, football stadium filled with employees and people. He just made such an impact. And I don't remember his name. It's escaped my memory now. Please forgive me. But that's, I'm not a great, person for remembering stories, but that one really stuck with me.
Yeah, it's really, there are so many good examples, whether it was Tony Hsieh, who was the CEO of Zappos, the culture there. Also Bob Chapman, who I write about in my book, who was the CEO of Barry.
I write about in my book also, yes.
Yeah, Barry Waymuller, who really decided to lead with love and treat people at work as family members. And he isn't someone who is viewed as just a kind person. He's turned his business around and run several successful companies.
Absolutely. They are great examples for sure. And I think the book Firms of Endearment, and maybe you might have read it. It also speaks to many organizations, others similar to those we refer to, who have, Patagonia is another great example, right? When the surf's up, work can wait. Is his CEO's famous line, right? Great stuff. So moving on then, and just carrying on from what you just shared, what practical mindfulness techniques perhaps might senior leaders incorporate into their daily routines to help them manage stress and, improve their overall well-being, or help them get out of overwhelm, which I often talk about in my articles and work with coaches or work with leaders as a coach?
Yeah, the first is really to define mindfulness, because if there are leaders who are listening to this who are already in mindfulness, they don't need us to tell them about it or to show them how. Who we're interested in speaking to, who I'm interested in speaking to, are people who maybe are skeptical, who haven't come across it before, who maybe don't really know what it's about. They think it's something that's religious and mystical and magical. And my first message is that it's really not, that there are now thousands of research articles showing benefits across the spectrum of 24 medical diseases, and not even to mention the benefits in the workplace, improving teamwork and safety and leadership ability. So having gone through that with a client or a leader, I would then start basic. And there's really only, I like to say there's only one practice, and the practice is pausing, which is hard. So in order to do this practice, we can't go about business as usual. We have to decide that there's another way of existing other than constantly doing, and that's there is a value in slowing down. And when we slow down, we can reflect, we can become aware of how we're showing up as leaders. Because without that daily and moment-to-moment awareness of how I am presenting myself, how can I possibly navigate thousands of team members who are looking to me unless I know how I'm portraying myself and how they're perceiving me? So a simple practice is to pause for just 3 breaths and taking a nice deep breath in through the nose, filling up the belly, and slowly exhaling, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms our own nerves. There's something called emotional contagion in the workplace, where a leader's demeanor, a leader's level of stress or ease, calm, will directly infect, in a sense, those around them on a subconscious level.
Well, can I
And
just
so,
pause you there? Yeah, I wrote, I'm about to write an article on that, is or can stress be contagious? So I think that's what you're saying. Like, they really pick up on our energy, right? Employees do.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's about 2 decades of research, some of it out of Harvard Business School, looking at the social dynamics of stress at work. And absolutely, this is the concept of emotional contagion, where it doesn't even require speech and words. By nonverbal cues, I can see in the micro expressions of my leader's face or my colleague's face, is this person at ease?
Yeah.
Are they pressured?
Yeah.
Because if they're pressured, then I feel pressured. And so it takes a steady leader to steady their teams, which is, for me, one of the qualities, 7 timeless qualities of the heart, which is a steady heart, steadies other hearts. And that's what we're talking about here.
Nice. Very nice. As you're sharing that, I've shared this story before, and hopefully I do justice to it. But I was listening to a mindfulness person, something like yourself, an expert leader. He was summoned to come to an executive group to teach mindfulness. So he went in and he sat down, and all the executives are sitting around him. And he just sat there, and it was like crickets, dead silence. And it went on for maybe, a minute or two. It seemed like eternity to the executives sitting around the table. And someone just said, sir, when are you going to start teaching us mindfulness? And he said, I started 2 minutes ago. And I just love that, because
Yeah.
it can be something as simple as just being present, being sitting there and just being in the moment.
Yeah, that reminds me of, there was a philosopher and mathematician, Blaise Pascal, who said that all of humanity's troubles could be solved if man could simply learn to sit quietly in a room alone for 1 minute.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And one of the practices that the graduates of some of the programs that I lead, they love the most these are people who don't like to sit still and sit quietly. So there's a simple practice of mindfully walking, which is, as we're walking, we're not trying to get anywhere. We're simply paying attention to the sensations of our feet and our legs and the movement through space as we're walking. And we use that as a laboratory to notice the habitual tendencies of our own worrying, planning, judgmental mind. And that just takes a minute or 2 walking to the washroom and back.
Yeah. And as I do, but I'm sure maybe you do in your work, do you coach them on even mindful eating? Because again, my suspicion is, I know this to be the case, they're in their meetings or Zooms or whatever, and just, the food is going in as they're conducting the meeting.
Yeah.
And then they wonder why they have indigestion and rely on Tums and everything.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, so 2 thoughts on this mindful eating that you're referring to. And for those who aren't familiar, it's a radically different way of approaching eating. It's not simply eating to get full or even eating to nourish ourselves. It's savoring each second, each moment of the process of eating. And so typically when we teach this, when I learned it, we start not with a meal, but with a single raisin. And I can take 15 minutes. And it sounds like torture, but it really was the most memorable experience I've ever had in my own learning, is to learn how much of my own life and the joys, the metaphor being the simple raisin, but how much of our life do we rush through? So the idea here is that there are 2 ways to practice mindfulness. There's mindfulness that we do formally when a teacher would come in. If I were to teach somebody these practices, so-called formal mindfulness, because you're sitting in a form, like a seated posture or a lying down posture. And then there's what's called informal mindfulness, which for me is really the point of it all. I'm not interested in leaders becoming meditation experts. I'm interested in leaders who have an ability to shift gears into a state of deep and ongoing awareness of what's happening inside of them in terms of their own health and well-being and the impact and needs of those around them. This is the root of emotional intelligence that mindfulness offers.
I I love that. And yeah, I mean, there's so many things we can do. I mean, just simple, and it's a little bit of a deviation from what you just described, but in preparing for our interview this morning, I'm a very high energy person and I'm typically juggling a lot. I have, global programs and podcasts and all the rest of it, busy like yourself, and you're a cardiologist, you're as busy as they come. But I just play like nice, slow music that
Mm,
resonates with me. And I really
mm,
zone in and focus on the music, and it takes my
mm,
mind off all the clutter and the chatter going on in my mind. And is there
mm.
something you like to do in preparation, say before a podcast or something like
Yeah,
that? I know you've described it in your book and in your other podcasts,
yeah,
like if you do in between meetings, say with clients or patients.
yeah. Well, it depends on what the intention is. So if specifically the intention is before a meeting,
Mhm.
for example, I used to get nervous.
Yeah.
If I'm speaking to somebody who's a leader in the space or if I'm being interviewed, I used to worry for a lot of reasons. One is, how are people going to perceive me? What if I say something wrong? What if I look like an idiot? And now it's not that I don't care, but I give myself permission, number one, to look silly, to say something wrong, and allow myself permission to be deeply human all the time. And that has freed up emotional space, so I don't feel like I have to prove anything and I can be more myself. And people tend to appreciate that. And the second practice that I do before this is usually before very big talks in front of hundreds of people, is I shift the attention away from myself. Not how am I going to do, how is this going to go over, but instead thinking about everyone in the audience and wishing them well, sending them love and care, even though I don't necessarily know them, and hoping that they derive some benefit from what I am going to offer to the best of my ability. So by shifting the attention from myself to those that I'm serving, usually I can speak more comfortably and naturally.
Well, that's great. I mean, that really speaks to servant leadership as well, right? Which you may be familiar
Mm.
with. And yeah, I just want to sit with that for a second. I think that's wonderful. And I just want to pick up on something also that I heard you mention in another podcast, that before going into, correct me if I'm misstating this, before
Mm.
going into your patient meetings, you'll do something like a little,
Yeah,
mindfulness or meditative, and it
yeah.
really grounds you. I guess maybe too, because I know in coaching, just quickly, in coaching, you can carry and pick up the energy from one session to the next, right? I even have
Hmm.
like a cleansing prayer I do. So
Yes.
what do you like to do in between so that you really zone in,
Yeah.
give your full attention to your patients?
I love your practice of the cleansing prayer. And this is the idea that to be an effective leader, we have to have situational awareness. And situations are changing all the time. And the most common situation is actually a person in front of us. And the biggest threat to effective leadership is bringing the residue of someone in our past
Yeah,
into this next present moment,
right.
because we're no longer experiencing and listening to the person in front of us. Instead, we're projecting a memory of someone else or a prior interaction onto this person, which really cuts off our ability to solve problems creatively.
Right.
So because of that, there are many simple practices to reset myself or reset ourselves so that we can become essentially an open vessel, a mirror for this next client that we're going to meet. What you were hearing me describe was a door knocking practice, which any leader or executive or anyone can do. And it's before we walk into the next room. If it's appropriate, we knock on the door, but not for the purpose of alerting the other person that we're coming in only. It's to alert ourselves that we're about to cross a new threshold. We have a new opportunity for a new experience. And that sound, combined with the physical vibration on our knuckle, can be used as a bell that wakes us up and reminds us to be our best self.
Nice. So, with leaders and like myself who are constantly doing virtual meetings, what would be, if you could just pull something out of your hat, what would be
Mm,
something we could do virtually? We're not knocking, but is there something we
yeah.
can do to reset ourselves in between meetings? Like,
Yeah. We can either do it in between meetings.
hmm?
I prefer to do it in a meeting. So you alluded to someone who was coaching mindfulness who came in and sat quietly for 2 minutes. So before I begin a meeting on Zoom, and I often will need a reminder, so I have little gadgets like this snow globe here,
Oh, nice.
which reminds me that if I don't pause for a moment, this is my mind.
Nice.
And
Very nice.
so and so what I'll do is I may look at that, and before you and I start on a call, rather than rushing right in, there's no rush. If we wait for 5 seconds, some people call that dead air. I call that alive air. We're breathing. So the practice when we're on a virtual call is to begin with a moment of quiet. Perhaps even if the group is interested, you could just agree to take about 30 seconds to collect ourselves and set our intentions for the meeting.
I love that. I actually did that with a co-facilitator in a global summit we did there as a presenters last week or two. And I did a little self massage and I also did a breath. And I realized I wasn't doing it as much or more for myself as I was for their
Yeah.
benefit. But
Yeah.
I'd never done it before, especially with a new audience, right?
Hmm.
And it just made such a profound
Mm.
difference.
Mm.
It really made a difference. So thank you for that reminder and thank you for involving that. I think that's wonderful. And I
Mm.
will put that challenge or, opportunity out there for leaders to consider doing that in your next meeting, right? I think like Simon Sinek and others who are really well versed in doing good meetings, he's talked about this as well and in his huddles and that he really tries to
Mm.
connect with and ground his team before he gets into the nitty gritty, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so in thinking about communicating the importance of practicing mindfulness for heart health, like, in your work with your patients or with the groups you lead and consult or coach, your presentations, do you offer like educational resources or some types of programs, for example, to your patients to really, use them as an example to help deepen their understanding of connecting between, mindfulness and heart health?
Hmm. We all learn in different ways. We all remember in different ways. We all rewire our nervous systems in different ways. And a single touch point, if it's a program or if it's a 5 minute introduction to meditation, we just have to recognize that that's what it is. It may be a taste or an introduction. And so we need to then have the main course. And the main course I can refer people to free courses. I like things that are free for my
Yeah.
patients in
Sure.
particular. And so there's something on YouTube called Palouse Mindfulness, Pallousse, where the greatest mindfulness teachers in the world, including John Kabat-Zinn, offer a full version of this mindfulness stress reduction course for free.
It's
Had a
great.
lot of people enjoy that. And this is also part of the reason that I wrote a book. I spent 2 years researching for a full year, interviewing 60 of the world's experts in these practices
Yeah.
and reviewing all of the scientific literature so that I could have a simple to understand sort of guidebook for anyone interested in getting into mindfulness, meditation, and understanding how we can become more compassionate to ourselves and others for our own, not just heart health, but really for living a good life.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about your book momentarily, but and I'm almost to the end of your book, but I believe you do offer and present some tactical strategies, things that people can do. So it's
Mm,
not just a book on theory or whatever of mindfulness.
mm,
It's very,
yeah.
very action oriented and tactical as well, right?
Hmm. Yeah, really the whole book, the bulk of it, is what part two of the book is only about practices. So every chapter, there are 7 chapters of 7 core virtues that all leaders must have. Core virtues and skills and attitudes that all leaders must have. And each chapter begins with the evidence and the reasons why we need to have this skill and ends with the most essential practices that people can do on their own and then share with their teams.
Nice, very nice. So moving on then, a concept, and I think we've probably alluded to it in some ways, but a concept really near and dear to my heart, and that I introduced maybe in through our programs, but also in my book, Cultivating Healthy and Vibrant Workplaces, is the concept of modeling visible permission by leaders to their employees or teams. And so, from your experience, how might leaders effectively model and encourage well-being practices within their organizations to create a culture of health and balance? And most importantly, again, to demonstrate visible permission, which is pretty, I think, hopefully self-evident evident or obvious as a term, but to demonstrate visible permission that it's not only okay, but encouraged to engage in self-care activities during the day to really, support and enhance one's well-being, focus, and productivity, right? Because we know that has a direct benefit on our performance in our
Yeah,
role.
well, I just did it a little bit right there. So, and the old version of me wouldn't have paused to take a drink in the middle of an interview.
There you go. Okay, let's hydrate together.
We'll do it together. And so often we ignore our own biological needs. And so,
Yeah.
but really, on a more practical level, there's a traditional view of a leader as being kind of a commander in the battlefield and wearing all of the regalia and the hats and the costumes and wanting to look perfect as they walk down the aisle. And I think what you're referring to is that there's a new model of leadership, there's a new approach to leadership, which is a lot more humane. And instead of a top-down view and command and control other people, it's more of a horizontal is one word. I like the idea of what's called constellation leadership, where, the executive may be one star in the sky, but all of the leaders in the organization is another star. And can we see each other's brightness? And part of that, to create an environment where we can recognize each other's greatness, is we have to make it safe to bring our authenticity, what makes us unique to work. And that can't happen if it seems like everyone's perfect. And so one of the things that a good leader will do to model vulnerability will say, I made a mistake. And here's what I'm going to do to work on that. What do you all think about this? Or admitting when they don't understand. So in a meeting, if a leader can say something like, I didn't fully understand what it was you were trying to communicate there. Now, that may not sound like a lot, it may sound obvious, but little statements like that go a long way to make it okay for others to ask questions, if that's the type of environment you want to lead.
Can I just
So
stop you
that's,
there? I just want to stop you
yeah,
quickly.
sure.
Before I go say I'll lose my train of thought if not. But I really like what you just said, and here's why. Because it's just added a new dimension to my concept of visible permission. Because when I came up with the thought and started talking about it in my book, I thought of it more from self-care, like seeing a leader strap on their sneakers, going out for a walk during the lunch hour. I
Mm,
didn't think about it in the context of how you just described it, like things like vulnerability.
mm, mm. Yeah, it's both.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I like what you're referring to and what you wrote about. That's the
yeah,
second part of it.
yeah,
That's the part of it where a leader may show a selfie of themselves, sweating and struggling to get up a
yeah,
hill, or
yeah.
even just going for a walk, that kind of a thing.
From everything I read, and I interviewed a lot of people for my book during the pandemic, and as you probably did as well. During the pandemic, we saw, and correct me if I'm misstating this or misrepresenting, but we saw a lot of leaders be really vulnerable, right?
Mm,
I don't know, have they pulled back a little bit from that since the pandemic?
mm.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
so it's hard for me to speak broadly. We're
Yeah,
in a
yeah, yeah,
sense,
for
if we
sure.
believe that all people are leaders.
Yeah,
Certainly, people who are in the leadership coaching space haven't pulled back from that. There's beginning with Brene Brown, who I think has influenced
yeah,
many of us.
yeah,
The core of her message is be authentic,
yeah.
be vulnerable. That's what people respond to. As far as in the real world, yeah, there's a natural pendulum swing. We all tend to forget about COVID until the next wave hits us as it's hitting us. And leaders are no different, which is why we need reminders. We need things like this. We need sticky notes. We need, for example, I keep a reminder for myself on my screen. It says, fill your head with good
Good.
stuff.
Oh, I love that.
So I think that leaders do well to leave themselves reminders about what's most important to them when they tend to forget over time.
Because it's so easy for the emergent issues or matters of the day to hijack everything we've
Yeah,
just talked about, right?
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I want to talk about now positive psychology in the workplace. So what strategies might leaders, or before I even go there, what is the concept of positive psychology for those who are not familiar with that concept or term?
And the shortest possible definition of positive psychology is the science of living a good life.
Hmm.
And the initial reaction of someone who's never heard of the field says, what? There's a science of living a good life? That sounds like philosophy.
Yeah.
And actually, this new field, which is about 50 years old, is rooted in philosophy. It's rooted in Stoic and other philosophies. And it really emerged in the 1950s in America by Abraham Maslow and other scientists who rejected in some ways the work of Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler, who was coming in between, some of the earlier mental health experts who tended to focus on the negative, diagnosing schizophrenia and PTSD and depression and anxiety. Instead, this new field of science was focusing on what are the qualities, attitudes, and behaviors of those people who live the happiest, most successful lives. It's essentially the science of success, is positive psychology. And there have been many different models. What people usually have what they call pillars or foundations. And depending on whether you look at Martin Seligman, who was the president of the American Psychological Association and who in 1998 announced that the entire American Psychological Association was shifting its focus to positive psychology. Depending who you look at, there are various pillars. The way I like to think about it is the purpose of positive psychology is to create space in our lives from that reactive default way of dealing with stress to a more proactive, intentional way of living. And there are 5 pillars in this space framework. One is self-awareness and self-regulation. And this is something that I've shared with our team members in our own healthcare system and elsewhere. P is a positive mindset. So instead of always being judgmental and negative, can we be more optimistic? Because optimistic people live longer and healthier. A is alignment. So can we live in alignment with our highest values? C is connection, because human connection keeps us alive the longest and healthiest. And E is enthusiasm, living not just to get by, but living with vitality and flow. So this is, in a nutshell, the science of positive psychology.
Nice, nice. And just to layer on that too, maybe coming back to Simon Sinek's beginning with our why, letting that be the foundation for it all, right? What is our why? Why are we showing up every day? And then, leveraging everything you just shared. I love it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I shouldn't say this because Simon Sinek has really started a movement for why. I think more credit is due to a man named Viktor Frankl.
Oh, yes. Man's search
Yeah.
for meaning.
So Man's
Absolutely.
Search for Meaning, which was written at the time of the Holocaust, when Viktor Frankl really studied people who didn't think they were going to be alive in the morning. And he found out and founded an entire field based on knowing your why, which is called logotherapy, which
Oh,
is helping people through trauma and suffering by refocusing on what's most important to them. So I don't know if Simon Sinek credits Viktor Frankl, but
okay. Well, thank you for
certainly,
that. Yeah.
but certainly there's a lot of credit to go around. And to your point, organizations where workers feel a sense of purpose in their work, not just for the benefits for themselves, but for their workplace, but societal and even global benefits, productivity increases by something like 400%, according to some studies.
Yeah. And that's where maybe entering the loving kindness meditation, right? Do you want to just speak to that? Because that really speaks to what you just shared as well.
Yeah, so loving kindness meditation, for those who haven't heard that phrase, it can be a little bit of a turnoff.
Yeah.
But basically, so there's positive psychology, just to kind of set the framework. Positive psychology is a map to living well for those of us who may be more left-brained and we want to make sure we've got all the boxes straight,
Yeah.
right? And then we need a compass, which means every moment to moment, how can I be sure that I'm living in alignment with that map? That's where the practice of mindfulness comes in. But that's not enough.
Yeah.
Because if I'm rigidly following my attention and shackling it down in a certain direction, we can often lose that most essential element, which creates a good life, which is connection with others and a kindness and a gentleness towards ourselves, our experience, others, and the world, which is where this practice that you were alluding to called loving kindness comes in. And this really it's a 3,000-year-old Buddhist practice, which is this idea of just wishing ourselves well.
Yeah.
Instead of beating ourselves up all the time, can we wish ourselves well? And then can we wish other people well? And I was alluding to that when I talked about how I deal with stress speaking in public.
Yeah.
And this is the practice that I do. It's loving kindness. Instead of, what are these people thinking of me? Or on the highway, what is this jerk doing cutting me off? Instead, I may offer a more gracious, kind thought, because I don't really know what other people are thinking. So why not assume the best? And why not wish other people the best? And there tends to be this positive, virtuous cycle that happens
Yeah.
when we maintain and cultivate these attitudes of kindness, as opposed, and this is an antidote to what leaders often face, which is a culture of judgment and scrutiny, and eventually it's lonely at the top.
Everyone out for themselves in some cases, right? And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Before we get into your book, I just want to touch on again the premise of leveraging compassion as leaders to really help foster healthy workplaces. So, is there anything else you might like to add in terms of how leaders might develop and demonstrate compassion interaction with employees? And then, of course, what impact, again,
Mm.
always, I like to bring it back to the bottom line, right? What impact will that have on the organization well-being and the organization's performance and other leaders'
Mm.
performance and teams and employee
Yeah.
performance?
Answering that question in reverse, and we've talked a bit about this from different angles here. The ultimate benefit of compassion, I can tell you as a heart doctor,
Mm,
it's more powerful than most medications. So
yeah.
if I bring a loving, caring presence to my heart patients, I can lower their blood pressure in the room. I can lower their heart rate in the room. I can relax and dilate the vessels in their body in the room by my compassionate presence. Leaders can do exactly the same thing among their workers. And we know that workers who are more relaxed have healthier brains that function at higher capacity. Because when we're stressed and we're nervous about what's the leader going to do next, our brain pathways that are responsible for openness, curiosity, and creativity shut down. And those pathways responsible for fear, avoidance, and survival become active. So this is not a trivial matter. This is something that has a direct impact on the success of our company, but really, from my perspective, on the complete and total health and well-being of everyone who works there. So this is a very serious thing. Whether or not we come to other people with anger, hostility, and frustration, or whether we come at them with gentleness, kindness, compassion, and assertiveness. So with that as a backdrop, now we can work backwards to answer the first part of your question, which was, what can leaders do to help others? And I'm going to reject that question because the answer is, at least the leaders that I know, and myself as a leader, back a few years ago when I entered this space, is to begin by exploring how compassionate we are with ourselves. Are we kind to ourselves? If we are quiet and we listen to the voice in our heads, is it a kind voice? Is it nurturing? Is it a caregiver and a cheerleader? Or is it a harsh critic that's constantly berating ourselves? Because unless we do that inner work for ourselves and bring that compassion practice towards ourselves, and that takes a lot of work, unless we do that, anything that we direct externally will not ring true and will not be sustainable.
I love that. I really love that. And as you're sharing that, something was going through my mind as well. Like a leader, maybe we've already touched on it, but just to emphasize it, going into the meeting, doing all these practices we've talked about, resetting themselves. If they, especially, I'll give an example. Like I know of a company right now, a family member is going through a big major reorg. There's a strike looming. I mean, it's just horrendous, right?
Mm.
And I'm thinking, well, wouldn't it be amazing if the CEO at the start of their town hall introducing all this just said, let's just have a moment here, appreciate each other, and just really ground it, and just bring that positive tone, right? And
Mm.
help to reset themselves before delivering this bad news, right?
Mm.
There's so many things, and it doesn't take, be a rocket scientist to figure this stuff out. It just takes a little bit of a
Mm.
concerted effort and mindfulness into
Mm.
how we're leading and going into our meetings. And, or if you are in a meeting, you can speak to this in a second. I mean, how might a leader diffuse or even regulate their own energy, right? If they're feeling those things are really percolating and the energy is just really escalating, right?
Yeah.
Something they could do like almost midstream in a session or a meeting to help
Yeah.
just bring everything down.
Yeah. I love the way you asked that question because you didn't ask how can a leader regulate other people in the room and defuse other people. You asked the question, how can a leader do that within themselves? Because that's really the secret. It's the same thing with compassion. For others, we have to begin. It's an inside job.
Right.
And what you're asking for could be the subject of 5 books. How do we regulate ourselves?
Yeah, yeah.
But for myself, at least, I struggled with this so much because when patients were sick or dying and it was the middle of the night and I was worried whether they would live or not, I would become very activated, very nervous, very stressed out, and wasn't able to be the calm presence that their families may have needed in that moment. And so for me, this simple practice has 3 steps, and I call it DRS, because when I'm stressed out, I know I need to remember something easily.
Yeah.
So the first step when we're feeling activated is to defuse the situation. We have to take that wick away of that bomb that's about to go off, and defuse has a second meaning. And to defuse means to no longer identify with the feelings that we're having. When I'm feeling angry, instead of I'm angry, giving myself some distance from the feeling so that I can look at it objectively. And we do that by labeling the emotion, naming it out loud or writing it down. So there's a phrase, name it to tame it. If you name an emotion, you're then deactivating the emotional centers in the brain and activating the word-finding centers, which are more forward towards the executive center. So the first step is defuse the emotion. We just decenter ourselves from the emotion itself. We become objective. Call it out. The second is R in DRS, doctors, and that's to relax. So notice any tightness or tension in the jaw and in the muscles. Take a deep breath and blow it out slowly. And then to reframe. So oftentimes the stress that we're feeling is not because of what's objectively happening in the world. It's because of how we're framing a situation. Often we're making ourselves the victim, or we're creating a situation that is seeming to be permanent, but it's really just a temporary situation. So there's a process called cognitive reframing or cognitive restructuring. And
That's sort of the story we're telling ourselves. And
it's the story we're doing ourselves. That comes
the film playing in our mind is generally not always the truth, right?
Exactly. And then the third, the S, is to simply soften our muscles, to soften our attitude towards ourselves. We often, when we're feeling frustrated, add on to that feeling of frustration by then feeling ashamed. I lost my patience again. I'm such a bad leader. Yeah. So now we have a second layer of negative emotions instead of the first layer. And so instead, can we replace that with kindness for ourselves and saying, I'm doing the best that I can. I'm not going to make it worse with judgment towards myself and others. Yeah. And then the second S is something called surf, which is this comes from addiction medicine. This idea of surfing the waves of our emotions, recognizing that you can't just make an emotion go away, nor would you even want to, but we can learn to simply, like a surfer, be with the ups and downs, and eventually the waves will settle.
How cool is that? I mean, how cool would it be for a leader, CEO, or whomever, a manager, frontline supervisor, to sit in a meeting and say, guys, I'm having a moment. Can we go through a DRS, or you don't even have to describe it, and not make it about the employees, make it about them and say, would I invite you to join me? Would you want, right? And I mean, what an awesome way to start a meeting. Or again, in the middle of a meeting, say, let's take time out. I feel we need a DRS, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever done that or been present when someone's done that or used a similar technique?
I do that quite often at work, and I also do it at home, and I also do it in the middle of the night when I wake up with worrying thoughts.
Your kids go, "Oh, there's Dad doing DRS again."
I do the DRS, and for me, I don't want to be judgmental because I love my nurses, but for me, I call the doctors DRS. So I need to call the doctors.
The doctor. Oh, that is so cool. That is so cool. And before we go further, because I want to get into your book now, but we haven't really talked a lot about and you just share what you're comfortable in sharing, but the response of your patients, and I'll just introduce it by this that I heard you talk about. And just love your approach and your practice on so many levels. And for a physician, maybe they can pick up on this if they're listening. When you sit with your patients, you said you'll sit lower level, right? Maybe on a little stool or something. So it's making them more important than you, if I'm putting that.
Yeah.
There's other reasons I'm sure you do it. But so I'll let you speak to that in a second. But secondly, or most importantly, is it's not every day you walk in, I don't think, to a cardiologist appointment and they start talking about mindfulness, right? And so, it's a couple of three-part question here, but how do you approach that? And what's the response and outcome of that approach with your cardiologist, your cardiac patients?
Yeah, I had a patient follow-up visit just this Monday. As a young man who was 39 years old, who initially came to see me because he was having heart palpitations out of control. He couldn't stop them, and they were terrifying him. He thought he was going to die. This is now 2 years ago.
Right.
And I asked him some questions, and I did an exam and some basic testing. And rather than $1 million of downstream testing and repeat visits, I just simply asked him, because I had a sense that it wasn't just his physical heart, there was something else going on with his emotional heart. I asked him about how he was managing the stress in his life, and he began to cry. He began to share that issues from his childhood and challenges in his relationships and lack of ability to speak up in the workplace. And I started to get a full picture that these heart palpitations were really emotional palpitations. And I just asked him at the end of the visit, this is how I do it with all my patients. I don't force anything. I say there's a practice here that it's not religious, it's not necessarily going to be spiritual, it's science-based, and this is something that I do for my own stress. Would you like to try it? And I can tell you that over the last several years, every single person who I've asked has said, yes, please. And so the funny part of the story is that I saw him about 3 months later, and I said, we'll just call him Chris. I said, Chris, what are you doing in my office today? Your visit is not for another 6 months. He said, no, I just want to do that practice with you again.
Oh, how nice. Okay,
Yeah.
so that brings me to mind a question. So I'm another cardiologist or another physician or specialist is saying, okay, like that's all wonderful, Dr. Fisher, but we have like 10, 15 minutes max between patients. Like, how am I gonna get everything done and still start talking about mindfulness? So what would you say to that?
Well, the first thing, I like this idea that the answer to how, because they're asking how, the answer to how is yes, it's possible.
Okay.
And I know that it's possible because I used to struggle to see 16 or 18 patients in a day and to have them feel felt and understood. And now I can see 24 patients in a day, and I have this is again not a matter of bragging, but I have the top-rated patient experience score. So
I'm sure you do.
it's a level 5.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a secret. I don't have any more time with my patients than the doctor in the next room. We all only have 15 minutes per patient.
Yeah.
And so what can we do differently? And this is for all leaders, not just physicians. What can we do differently? Well, first of all, we can throw away the idea that it takes time to be kind and compassionate. Just throw away the idea. Throw away the idea that it's another item on our to-do list. Instead, embrace the idea that it's simply a shift in attitude. It's simply a shift in attitude. Each question, each positioning of the hand on the body as we're examining, each look in the eye is now done from a place of human connection.
Yeah, I love
Human connection. And so that's part of it. And then the other is something that is, I think, a huge subject that we could spend hours talking about, perhaps another time, which is the root of effective time management in relationships where there's a high-pressured situation and not a lot of time, is understanding the principles of empathic communication. The so-called nonviolent communication or assertive communication with compassion, whatever you want to call it. This is one of the core practices, and we went over this last month on a system-wide call that I led with our team psychologist, in what are the effective ways to communicate. We don't have to spend an hour with a patient. We can get the same information across in a shorter period of time by deploying strategic empathy. And
Empathy.
strategic empathy, and that allows us time to do these practices at the end of the visit or anything that we really want to.
So if our listeners listening, a leader or whomever, an organization, I think, oh, our organization could use a strategic empathy. Is that something they could contact you and contract you to come in and do a session? Or is that even something that you do? Or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, this is one of the programs that we talk about is I do entire programs on empathy and
yeah,
compassion.
nice,
And
nice.
and so last night we did an hour and a half program for a professor of law in Santa Barbara and Ventura for 25 law students.
Okay,
And we spent an hour and a half for law students, and I went over the science and art and practice of empathy and compassion as it relates to legal work.
nice. Oh, I'm sure that cohort could use it. And do you do this virtually, like through maybe Zoom or
It's
something? Or yeah.
in person and also virtually. Yeah.
Okay, nice. So in wrapping up then, oh man, I could just keep you here for another hour, but you are a busy physician, so we gotta let you
Thanks.
go. Your book, Just One Heart. I love the title very quickly. How did you come? Because I know there could have been, I follow you on LinkedIn and I know you're,
Mm,
asking,
mm,
polling, what would be a good
yeah.
title? Why did you land on that title?
Yeah. It has different meanings. I landed on it because I had too many patients say to me, "Why did I have a heart attack? Why did I develop this problem? I'm taking care of my physical heart." And I would say something like, "But look at all the stress you're under as a leader at work, and you're not managing that." And they'd say, "Yeah, but that's just, work, that's separate." And the message is, no, there is just one heart. The physical heart depends on the health of our emotional heart, which is rooted in the health of our social heart, which has a foundation of our spiritual heart. And so these are not separate metaphorical hearts as they have been viewed more recently. If you go back in history, and I do this in chapter 1, I explain how every wisdom culture, religious tradition around the world viewed the heart and mind and emotions and spirituality as connected. It's only in our more modern Western approach that we've segmented each of these. We've dissected out each one from the next, and we have a very disjointed approach. So I want to get across the message that if you want to take care of yourself, it's not just the physical heart. It's all four dimensions of the heart. There's just one heart. And then, of course, there's the message for leaders that's hidden in the title.
Mm-hmm.
If a company is struggling, if a team is struggling, and you say, well, we don't have enough people to do this change, to change our culture, the message is, no, it just takes one heart. It takes one individual to present themselves steady and calm and open and wise and kind and courageous and warm, who can then ripple the change outward. So it takes just one heart to make a change.
One compassionate heart for sure.
Yeah.
Now I have some more questions, but I have to ask you about this because I was reading the other night in your book, you talked about diastole rest. Am I saying that correct?
Yeah.
And please correct me if I'm misstating this, but
Hmm.
you learned of it through a director, through your training, back in your
Yeah.
medical training. And
Yeah.
that I've just noted here that rest isn't just the absence of work, but an active, necessary, vital process for recharging. So can you just break that down a little bit and what that means exactly?
Yeah, if you take a tour, if you were to imagine you shrink yourself down and you go inside your own heart, suddenly there's this squeezing that happens, this contraction where you're about to get ejected forcefully into the body. That's called systole. That's the part of the heart's function that we all think about. It gets all the fame and all the attention. How strong is your heart? The squeezing of the heart. But what I didn't know until 25 years ago, and most doctors didn't know, is that the other phase of the heart, the relaxation phase, where the heart has to fill up again to get ready for the squeeze, is equally as important, number one, as the squeezing, because if it doesn't relax properly, the heart can fail.
Right.
Because it doesn't fill up properly, it doesn't restore itself, it doesn't rejuvenate for the next beat. So that diastole, it was my program director, Marshall Wolf, who when I was a first year trainee at Harvard, and I couldn't sit still. And I've got 10 minutes and I've got nothing to do. He said, enjoy diastole, which is that period in between squeezes. And that always stuck with me.
Nice, nice. So, um, when you use the words active, necessary, and vital, is it active or is it maybe just a sense of just sitting?
Mm.
What
Yeah.
how active do we need to do to
Yeah.
recharge? Or is it kind of the antithesis of that, maybe?
Yeah. So borrowing again from the heart itself, the physical heart itself, it was long thought that the relaxation of the heart was a passive process, kind of like the lungs after we breathe out,
Mhm.
they recoil. There's an elasticity. It's a passive process, but the heart is not like that. In order to relax, ATP, which is a form of energy, is actually used just to relax. So the practice is the same for humans. We cannot just stop what we're doing and expect relaxation to occur.
Right.
We have to decide, we have to set an intention that we are going to actively relax. It sounds funny, but there's a process called progressive muscle relaxation, active relaxation. Because so many executives are so busy, and because our phones are constantly chiming in and interrupting our lives, unless we are active about the relaxation process, it doesn't happen effectively.
But, anything else you'd like to share about your book or any tactical strategies, any final parting words you might like to leave our listeners? Because
Hmm.
I'm just loving this. I hate for I hate for our session to end here, but anything you
Oh.
want to share?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of parting words, it comes back to this game-changing, life-changing practice,
Mm.
which is this practice of learning to notice how we talk to ourselves, learning what the inner environment are creating each and every day for ourselves, learning to notice the outer environments that we exist in, whether it's a home. Are we paying attention to the order and peace in our home? Are we bringing peace to our home and to our workplace?
Yeah.
And creating an inner environment that then will naturally emanate outwards, and not putting as much worry into how can I do all of these things to other people to change other people, but really focusing on ourselves. And that is rooted in self-kindness, self-compassion, and eventually something that the happiest people in the world all know. It's a practice, an experience of self-love. Do you love yourself?
So looking at the quote on my screen here, Executive Wellness Unplugged, what's one specific message you could give to leaders or executives based on
Mm.
everything we shared? Something they could just really think about after watching this.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say keep it really simple. The first thing is if you're going through a hard time right now, often the biggest challenge is that we are rejecting reality. We're denying reality. We don't want things to be this way. And we can create a lot of peace and ease by simply accepting situations as they are so that we can then move onward. So one is just noticing any points in your leadership and life where you're resisting something that's causing frustration in your life. Look at that. Look at all the places where you're resisting and where you're experiencing frustration, and use that as information, like a scientist. The second is once you notice the areas of your life where there's friction, there's difficulty, there's worry, there's fear, is engage some of these practices we've talked about in order to balance your emotional state, so that instead of walking around kind of on eggshells or on a rampage or ready to put out a fire, you can walk in a more steady way, more balanced and even, so others can really depend on you as to help them co-regulate. And then the third is instead of living your life by accident or by default or according to whatever is on your schedule today, see if you can instead live your entire life intentionally and by choice. And that is part of living authentically, is what choices, how would you like to live today and this week? What example, what legacy do you want to leave? And then that'll naturally determine how you behave towards others.
So to take us out, and then I'll have some closing words, would you just like to do just a couple minute
Yeah,
relaxation exercise with myself or
sure.
listeners?
Yeah, sure. So as we begin this, notice that if we set to relax ourselves, our bodies and minds don't necessarily want to relax.
Mm.
And there can be a tension if we set with the intention that we are going to relax, because when we don't feel it, then there's frustration that comes in. So what I would invite you into is an experience for about 2 minutes of just getting curious about how the body is right now. And you may discover that some changes happen.
Yeah.
And it always begins by finding a comfortable posture, generally upright and relaxed with feet on the floor and hands in the lap, shoulders relaxed, and taking a deep inhale through the nostrils, filling up the belly as deep as possible. Now exhaling through the mouth as slowly and completely as possible. Just one more deep breath all the way in, holding for a second. And now, as slowly as you can, exhaling the air, allowing the eyes to close, if it's comfortable, or just gazing in front of you, as you soften the muscles in your face, shoulders, hands, and belly. Now allow your breath to return to its natural rhythm, in and out, through the nostrils, not trying to change it or manipulate it. Can you simply trust that the body will breathe all by itself? Can you simply become the observer now? Notice that there is a body, perhaps feeling into the feet on the floor and any sensation or pressure or vibration there. Without judging, without thinking about it, this is an experiential moment. Can you feel the feet on the floor? Now shifting awareness to the thighs on the chair. Noticing any pressure. Bringing awareness now to the shoulders, the arms, and the hands. Is there ease, discomfort, comfort? Is the belly firm and clenched, or is it relaxed and easy, allowing the air to flow in and out through the nostrils? And in this brief moment of stillness, bringing awareness to the heart itself, beating 100,000 times a day in the chest, sending a note of gratitude for this beating heart. Thank you. Now asking your own heart a simple question. What are you needing most right now? I'm just listening for the answer from your own heart. Perhaps the heart is asking for more moments of calm and stillness. Perhaps the heart is asking for more connection, deeper connection with others. Perhaps the heart is asking for clarity. Maybe the heart is asking for love. And whatever it is, allow that need to become your intention. Allow this word, this intention, to grow like a glowing light, filling up your chest, filling up the space around you, filling up the room, even the town you're in, filling up the country, spilling over. Imagine if more people in the world experienced what it is that your heart is calling for. And congratulate yourself for this brief and powerful practice, coming back to this body sitting here breathing, coming back to this space and allowing the eyes to open gently if they were closed in your own time.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Is there any final words? I want to make sure that you've been able to share everything that you wanted to share.
This has been wonderful. I love your focus on wellness. I really do mean it, that your book is an inspiration in its depth, in the wisdom that you share, and I can just feel the passion you have for this work. It comes out with your energy that you referred to. So I'm grateful for the invitation and to be the first guest on this podcast.
Oh, I'm just so delighted. I know you are really approached a lot and to do these podcasts, and you have a busy, you have your book launch party tonight. So that's congratulations. Good luck with that. And and the same goes for your book. I'm near the end of it, and I just see your passion and your personality come through a lot. It's just very, it's a needed book for today, for these times.
Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
if anyone is interested, it's easy to find at
Yeah.
justoneheartbook.com, or it's on Amazon as Just One Heart.
And please follow Dr. Fisher. I don't know how you do it, and you say you do a lot this yourself. Engage with social, and I think it's phenomenal. You have quite a following, and so connect with Dr. Fisher, and if you can, or follow him on LinkedIn. So thank you so much, Dr. Fisher. Thank you, Jonathon. It's just
Thank
been
you.
so enjoyable. I mean, it even surpassed my expectations for this first episode. So kudos to you. Any other way someone might get in touch with you?
Yes, it's easy.
Yeah.
It's easy. One word, Happy Heart MD. Happy Heart MD. You can find my YouTube channel, Instagram, Facebook, however you want to connect with me.
Happy Heart MD.
Happy Heart MD.
Oh, I'm going to Instagram now and looking you up. Well, thank you again, John.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll link everything up in the show. So be sure to look for our upcoming episodes, Executive Wellness Unplugged, via our podcast page on our website, workplacewellnesscoe.com, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. So thanks again, Jonathon, and stay healthy, everyone. As I like to say, keep it real and keep moving your body. Bye for now.